Hello everyone, this is going to be one of those videos where I tell you we are all screwed, and it is down to that despicable generation known as the youth. Though the youth in this video is going to refer to people anywhere between the age of 10 and 40, because millennials have literally grown up in a world where they don't actually need to grow up, and where social media has kept them in specific echo chambers where they can remain being wrong, and the real world and the older generation aren't there to correct them. And you might be saying, well, yes, we've known this for quite a while, and yes, that is true, we have, but now we actually have data to back it up. And a quick overview from the IEA was made called The Rise of Cultural Socialism, a review of 2 reports, published just today, in fact. And in it, they start by explaining that our colleagues over at Policy Exchange have published 2 reports analysing public opinion on the culture war issues, with a particular focus on the younger people. In the report, The Politics of the Culture Wars in Contemporary Britain and the Political Culture of Young Britain. Those reports make excellent complementary reading to the IEO's own report, Left Turn Ahead, surveying attitudes of young people towards capitalism and socialism, since ours focus more on economics and theirs more on socio-cultural issues. So first things first, before we properly get into this, I think it's worth going through some of the main statistics in the findings of these reports. So I think first off we'll go into the politics of the culture war in contemporary Britain. So according to a survey of 1,800 members of the British public surveyed on the 9th to 11th of May 2022, the British public leans approximately 2 to 1 against the cultural leftist position across 20 culture war issues. Opposition varies, for example, from 97% on whether school children should be separated into oppressors and oppressed by race, to 85% on Britain being more racist than other countries, to 59% against the idea that Britain is a racist country, to 43% on support for people displaying their pronouns. The cultural leftist position was only in a slight majority in 3 of 20 issues polled. So generally the British public are against the leftist position on things, and naturally the more extreme the cultural leftists go, the more in opposition the British public are. Though I am quite surprised that it's just under half of people who are in opposition of people displaying their pronouns, though to be fair, having a look at the specific question, do you support or oppose people displaying their pronouns, for example on work emails or social media profiles, those with an opinion might simply be saying, oh, they have the right to express themselves in this way, rather than it should be forced on everyone, so really that answer is quite understandable. So cancel culture issues split the far left from the centre left, centre and right. Critical race theory themed issues pertaining to heritage and history strongly mobilise the right and centre while fragmenting the left. Hence, a consensus view on culture war issues is against the cultural left. Politicians or parties who fall on the wrong side of this are likely to suffer an electoral penalty, while those who stand with the majority stand to benefit. So I hope you're listening here, Tories. Going on the leftist positions you've been doing for the past few years is not helping your case. Voters under 35 are significantly more likely to endorse the cultural leftist view on culture war issues, with a ratio closer to 1 to 1 on these questions, with opinion evenly divided. This portends a rise in prominence of these questions in the years to come as Britain shifts left towards more contested positions. Those aged 18 to 25 split evenly on whether Kathleen Stock should have been defended by a university and whether J.K. Rowling should have been dropped by her publisher. Oof. You can clearly see this is where the problem comes in. Kathleen Stock and J.K. Rowling, the reason he has used those 2 people is because it was clear that it was faux outraged. No one particularly cared about J.K. Rowling's position, but a lot of people started going against the trans radical activists because it was clear that they were going absolutely nuts about J.K. Rowling. And this is where the problem comes in. People just younger than me, those Zoomers that everyone was saying are going to be the most conservative generation since the war, yeah, no, they are absolutely bona fide leftists. This issue should not be split. At most, it should be about 5% of people saying J.K. Rowling should be dropped by a publisher. And yet it's a 50-50 split for people that I don't think should be voting. And next it gets even worse. A quarter of British people worry about losing their reputation or job due to interpretations of what they say or have posted online. Like having 25% of the population worry about their reputation or job because of arguments they have online is insane. That should be 0%. Close to half of right-leaning voters under age 35 worry about losing their reputation or job for speech or social media posts. Hey, I'm one of them. Most workers in large organisations have taken diversity training. Around 4 in 10 British workers have taken diversity training, and rising over to 6 in 10 among those working in organisations with more than 100 people. Yeah, it is amazing. I've just left a job from a rather large organisation and I'm joining a smaller organisation, and there's no diversity training whatsoever. By law, they need a net zero policy, but by law they don't need a diversity training policy, which I'd rather they didn't have the net zero one either, but here we are. Diversity training has a significantly chilling effect. 41% of right-wing voters who have taken diversity training worry about losing their job or reputation for speech. This compares to 20% of left and liberal voters who have taken diversity training and 27% of right-wing voters who have not taken such training. And if you thought it was bad enough that diversity training literally makes people worry for their own jobs, wait till you hear this next bit. Actually, just before I go on, you'll notice that in these findings, even leftists and liberals, meaning centre-left people, even a fifth of them are worried about losing their job after diversity training. It is so bad that even some leftists are worried about it. And as I say, it gets worse. Diversity training may be limiting black advancement. There is no significant difference between left and right voters' willingness to criticise a black work colleague, at around 20 to 25%. But among voters who lean right, diversity training has a significant adverse impact. 38% of right party voters who have taken diversity training say they would feel uncomfortable providing negative feedback to black worker colleagues. 45% of right-wingers who worry about losing their job or reputation and have taken diversity training would feel uncomfortable providing negative feedback to a black work colleague. This compares to 31% for worried left and liberal voters and 20% for left liberal leaning voters who don't worry about losing their job or reputation. And this is part of the reason that a lot of people are leaving the left. A lot of right-wingers have pointed this out. They've pointed out that diversity training, all it's going to do is split people up and then make people literally be incredibly uncomfortable to say anything that they would to a white person, to a black person. And when one of the biggest news stories of the past couple of weeks was Lady Suzanne Hussey having to resign from her place in Buckingham Palace because she asked a black woman in clear African garb where she really came from, i.e., what is your heritage, there was a whole media storm about it, and she resigned from her post in the palace. Do you really think that seeing things like this is going to make these people feel better about themselves? No, it's going to make them feel they can't say anything to black people because it means they will lose their job. And quite a lot of black people are not going to want that. They just want to be treated as normal people. Diversity training is not helping that, and the wider cultural war is not helping that. Gets even worse, by the way. 54% say the current political climate prevents them from saying what they truly believe, rising to 76% for right-of-centre voters, which is something I'm trying to batter back. I want to be part of that 24% that says what they really think about their politics, because really, when we say right-of-centre, we obviously mean radical centrists. By a 51 to 32 margin, people think Britain should focus on the positives more than negatives in its past, and want the balance of pride and shame to lean 60 to 40% towards pride. Personally, I'd have that 75 to 25%. But at the moment, given the current curriculum, I will kill for 60 to 40 ratio. By a 49 to 31 margin, people believe that organisations' equity and diversity policies should focus as much or more on ideological diversity as on racial and gender diversity, whereas really I want that to be 100% of people wanting it to get rid of diversity policies. This bit gets a bit interesting. Nearly half, 44% of Leave voters working in Remain-dominated workplace departments say they feel uncomfortable voicing their beliefs at work. This compares to 19% of Remainers who say they would be uncomfortable expressing their beliefs to Leave-dominated workplaces. That is quite a shift. Overall, just 45% of Leave supporters feel comfortable expressing their views at work compared to 67% of Remain supporters. Under half of Leave supporters feel safe voicing their opinions at work. I mean, no wonder it was such a surprise when Leave won back in 2016. Remain voters are highly siloed within Remain-leaning workplaces, with 67% working in environments they perceive as Remain-dominated. Among Remainers with degrees, 77% work in Remain-dominated workplace departments and just 4% in Leave-dominant departments. See, it's an echo chamber. That's why there's such an echo chamber here. Not only are they working in Remain-dominant departments, but also when they look on the news, it's all Remain propaganda yet again. Most Leave voters work in places where they don't know the political backgrounds of their colleagues. This seems to partly be due to Leavers' lower attention to politics, but may also arise because Leavers are relatively shy about their beliefs. Yes, Leavers are the ultimate grillers. It's just I want to be left alone and grill for God's sake. Don't want to talk about politics, I want to talk about football, technology, and what's going on with the local village carnival. So now we get into another issue, which is the women. Women are significantly more likely than men to endorse trans women's rights to enter women's spaces. For instance, 36% of women support the idea that trans women should be allowed to enter women's refuges, while 32% oppose this. Men oppose this 40 to 30. Which I do honestly find quite surprising. But I suppose it's the idea of women being slightly more open than men to new ideas. Maybe it's something to do with that. Or maybe men just know what other men are like. The report recommends that Conservative parties should feel confident in advancing conservative positions on cultural issues, secure in the knowledge that the majority of voters share their values, whilst left or Liberal parties should seek to downplay such questions in favour of economic issues. The problem is with the Conservative Party is that they are like hawks when it comes to the polls. They see any dip in their voter base, they knee-jerk, ask their researchers what is everyone voting for. The researchers say, well, they're going to the left clearly, when really that isn't the case. The problem is that Conservative voters are simply just not voting for them anymore. Because why would they be voting for a party that keeps moving listfully to the left? When what they clearly want, as this research paper shows, is for more radical centrism, or centre-right positions in politics, especially when it comes to culture. Also, the research paper says that left or Liberal parties should downplay the questions of culture and instead look to economic issues. I really wish they wouldn't, because they are still leftist and still going to ruin the country. The report recommends that diversity training in organisations be paused until newer variants can be shown to produce measurable positive outcomes. In other words, get rid of them completely, because that's never going to happen. The report recommends that school history texts not be drawn primarily from critical academic sources, but should instead emphasise positive national achievements in equal measure, if not more, than critical of the national past, because it really is a joke, the history curriculum. It is either didn't we do good in World War II, wasn't Henry VIII a moron for killing 2 of his wives and divorcing 2 others, and did you know that the history of our country had a bit to do with religion? And then when they get onto the English Civil War, they don't mention how important religion is there. In short, our history curriculum is just dire. Basically, no one knows that we ended slavery and made it impossible for other empires to partake in the trade, but, well, what's the worst that can happen? I guess we'll find out. This should include elements that celebrates the combination of people from different backgrounds, such as the role of the Commonwealth soldiers during the World Wars. Yeah, that seems fine with me. The report recommends that public workplaces not promote cultural leftist positions. These are political ideas, not consensus values. Government should enforce impartiality on these issues across the public sector, including the civil service, NHS and schools, because they are clearly incredibly leftist. I mean, even in schools, it's something like 90% of teachers vote for Labour, and it's probably something to do with the fact that they are not enforcing political impartiality in these sectors. The report recommends that private workplaces not promote cultural leftist positions. These are political, not moral. Doing so can alienate workers, lead to more brittle interracial interactions, and make it harder to retain talent. Hence, I have just left a big organisation. So as you can tell from those key findings from that report on the politics of contemporary Britain, the majority of people are centre-right, basically. Or at least would agree with the things I say on this channel when it comes to culture. Please stop all of this nonsense. It is getting in the way of any sort of progress. Most people would like to find a way to get cheaper houses and find a way to Mars, then work out whether you should ask someone about their heritage or not if they are clearly dressed in African garb. However, the left keep making offences on the culture war, and then any sort of defence from the right wing or even the centre, it is claimed that the right wing are stirring up a culture war, while our culture is being completely decimated from the inside out. And if you want evidence of this, well, the next report, which is the political culture of young Britain, there is a little introduction that goes like this. In his book, Small Men on the Wrong Side of History, the journalist Ed West argues that conservatism is dying in Britain. Young people, especially women, are overwhelmingly left-wing on cultural questions. He points to the rise of Christianity, which similarly brooked largest among young women in the 1st centuries AD, then broke through as the established creed of the Roman Empire. Progressivism in cultural matters has also become overwhelmingly dominant among the status elite in the English-speaking world, and this, claims West, sets the tone for the socialisation of young and aspiring people. For West, the left has a moral monopoly, so that those outside of the faith are under an unspoken obligation to prove their moral worth by denouncing those on their right, whereas there is no such obligation on a leftist to set red lines to their extreme left to be considered moral. So, like some people on the right have been saying for some years, oh, don't punch right, you don't see the left punching left. This, according to Ed West, is kind of true. The problem is, if you don't punch left properly, as the leftists should have absolutely been doing for some time to denounce their radical and extremist variants, it's just ended up completely destroying their credibility. Though they still have their moral monopoly, it will be crumbling apart at some point. The problem, as you will see at the moment, is that, well, the Zoomers and Millennials, it's going to take a while for them to actually have their moral monopoly broken down. Honestly, as I say, Clan Decade, gonna get worse before it gets better, but you see Millennials in Parliament, whether they be left or right wing, and they've absolutely no presence in the room outside of screaming racism, or being, for lack of a better term, complete NPCs. So we just have to limit their power as much as we can by trying to not vote them in. A cringe Tory MP is much better than a complete and utter communist Labour MP. Anyway, it continues, is West's contention accurate? In an attempt to find out, this report examines the demographics and political beliefs of a sample of 1,542 18 to 20-year-old British young people surveyed by YouGov between 14 in April and 6 in May 2022. Links to the questions and cross-tabulations can be found here. It focuses on mapping the culturally left youth culture that West so prominently identified in his book, and which underpins progressive parties' overwhelmingly 60-point advantage over conservative parties among young people. The study design allows me to examine which forces, such as education and social media, are reproducing this culture and what its consequences are for, among other things, expressive freedom, national identity, minority progress and well-being. So, let's quickly go through these findings again. The majority, 59% of British school leavers, say they have either been taught or heard from an adult at school about at least one of white privilege, unconscious bias, and systematic racism, 3 concepts associated with applied critical race theory. This rises to 73% if we include critical social justice approaches to gender, notably the idea of patriarchy or that there are many genders. 2/3 of young people taught critical social justice concepts say they were not told that there are respectable counter-arguments to these ideas. This suggests that several million children may have been taught these radical left ideas as truth. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me, and this is exactly why, with a lot of young people, they will just default to, you're a racist or a bigot or whatever, because that is all they will be told is the only reason you'd oppose these things, because you're a racist or sexist or something. And that's why a load of young people are just NPCs, rather than these Chad conservatives that I was told they would be. 46% of white and Asian young people exposed to all 5 CSJ concepts in school say they would not have felt comfortable criticising a black schoolmate compared to 30% of white and Asian individuals exposed to no CSJ concepts, a significant negative effect. Wow, diversity training ruins people's minds. Who would have thunk? 40% of those exposed to all 5 CSJ concepts in school say they felt fearful of being shamed, punished, or expelled for voicing their opinions on controversial subjects, compared to 17% of individuals exposed to no CSJ concepts, a significant negative effect. So it appears that school does indeed have some role to play when it comes to kids' development. I mean, who would have thunk? However, he's not saying that this is where they were introduced to it, it's just saying that this is where they have seen these concepts before. And with the vast majority of them, by the way, 2/3 of them, not hearing that there are any respectable arguments against this, of course I'm just going to feel, well, I can't say anything against it then. You know, if I criticise a black guy, oh my god, I'm a racist. It is not healthy, to say the least. And the problem is as well is that when these people go online to try and find counter-arguments to these sorts of things, and they find channels like mine or Sargon's or something, a lot of our advice when we're asked, oh, well, what do we do if we encounter these things? We don't really say, oh yeah, push back on it as much as we can. No, we can understand their issue and say, well, just don't make a fuss, get your qualifications and get out of there. But then as shown in the politics of contemporary Britain, even then when they get into a job, because odds are you're going to go into a big corporation, you then get more of the ideas anyway. And there, do we say, yeah, say no? No, we don't. We say, no, you need to make your money, we understand. Like, not everyone's a warrior. But this is just making the problem worse and worse and worse and worse. So I think we need a better answer than just keep your head down and keep working. There's got to be a better answer than that. Leave supporters and Conservatives are around twice as likely as Remain supporting or left-wing respondents to say they feared being shamed, punished, or expelled for voicing their opinions on controversial subjects in school. Just 34% of Remain supporting young people would be comfortable dating a Leaver, while 66% of Leavers would be comfortable dating a Remainer. Man, I honestly do feel so lucky that I managed to find a girlfriend that's a leaver. Because most women on Bumble and all that, complete Remainers, have pride flags all over their goddamn profiles. And I just know I'd get annoyed at them, but I'd still give it a go, because men are desperate. Overall, 4 in 10 Remain supporters would hire a Remainer over a leaver for a job. However, those who discriminate in dating are much more likely to discriminate in hiring, while 2 in 10 Remain supporters who are very comfortable with the idea of dating a leaver would hire a Remainer over a leaver for a job instead of remaining neutral. This rises to 8 in 10 among Remainers who would be very uncomfortable dating a leaver. So when my title says that the Millennials and Zoomers are going to ruin civilization, things like this is why. This is exactly why. Because the leftist moral monopoly has clearly stated that if you're a leaver, well, like all other social justice concepts, being a leaver means you are racist. There is no reasonable reason to oppose Remain. You saw it all the time on TV, you see it all the time in school. Why would you hire someone who is clearly such a bigot and has no critical thinking skills like you do, you very clever Remainer? And this is the culture we end up with the vast majority of Remainers saying, I wouldn't even date a leaver, and then saying, yeah, I wouldn't even hire one either. I mean, of course that's going to make people hide their politics, and then no wonder people like Trump get in charge. And then if Reform actually get their politics in gear and stop going on about this WEF and net zero nonsense, and instead go to subjects that people actually care about, like this sort of thing, like changing the school curriculum, like completely getting rid of critical social justice concepts from schools, from the public service and things like that, things that actually matter to people, then they'd get an overwhelming majority. But they're not doing that because for some reason the right wing are politically moronic. They would be the perfect voice for the people that clearly can't say anything because they probably wouldn't get hired. And yet they are incapable of doing that. Young minorities are significantly less left-wing, politically correct, and polarised than young whites, suggesting that they are less affected by the dominant youth culture. Around 1 in 10 young people identify as LGBT. That's a bit nuts, isn't it? Well, to be fair, a lot of women say they're bi when they have never had a girlfriend or even relations with a woman. 46% of LGBT young people say that they are sad or anxious most of the time, compared to 28% of heterosexual respondents. 43% of young women are sad or anxious most of the time, compared to 25% of young men. I mean, these stats aren't particularly surprising to me. A lot of young people are quite sad and anxious, and that is because all they see all the time is how horrible things are, whether it be the economy, whether it's what they're told about environmental collapse, but not teaching kids that they can have some sort of future, basically. Of course, that's going to make quite a few of them sad and anxious. Luckily, it seems most of them have parents that are able to tell them that no, you do actually have a good future coming your way. So that's something. Those who had the grades to enter university but have chosen not to attend are less left-wing, but not more right-wing than those who plan to attend or are already at university. Basically, it seems that they're centrists, I guess. Those who had the grades to enter university but have chosen not to are less supportive of political correctness than those who attend or plan to attend university. However, political beliefs and cultural attitudes account for only a small portion of why fewer men go to university, and do not explain why whites attend university at a lower rate than minorities. I didn't think it would. My reasoning for why less young white men are going into universities than any other demographic is simply down to the fact that the incentives. In other words, you have all these scholarships, all these different charities trying to push through for basically every demographic apart from young white boys. And it doesn't help that quite a lot of university courses are just quite frankly geared towards women, unless they're in STEM. So boys that aren't going to go into STEM or, say, economics or something like that, what would they bother going into at university? Why wouldn't they just bother not going, trying to find an apprenticeship and getting a trade job or something? It makes a lot more sense. Those who plan to attend university are as left-wing and supportive of political correctness as those attending, suggesting that schools, social networks, media and psychology, rather than university content, is the main transmission belt for cultural left attitudes. Though that doesn't not mean that universities aren't leftist. Well, you can tell here that they're leftist hellholes, it's just they come already leftist at this point. Young people who work are somewhat more right-leaning than those who do not, but are not more conservative on cultural issues. Social media and peers account for the lion's share of how young people come into contact with critical race theory. Schools are less important, but appear to heighten pupils' threat perceptions. Ideology, rather than psychology, fragility, or social media use, predicts young people's relative cultural socialist position in the culture wars, even as psychology is also important. So kids see all this stuff on social media, they go to their teachers, ask about it, and teachers basically don't give them the other side of the issue and just say, yeah, that sounds right. They then go into university still thinking that it's right, or if university isn't for them, they don't go to university but still hold these beliefs. So yeah, from this report, it looks like the kids are screwed. They don't have a chance. The whole culture is a whole social media of people pushing CRT onto them. They constantly see this stuff. They communicate with each other saying, oh my god, have you seen all the CRT stuff? How does it sound to you? Oh, I don't know. And then when they ask someone in authority who teaches them things, a teacher, then the teacher says, oh yeah, no, this is alright. Don't question it, because questioning it is racist. And then this is affecting a lot of young people negatively. It's probably something to do with nearly half of young women being constantly sad and anxious. Whereas men go, okay, and then just go off and play sports or something. I don't know. So now we get into recommendations. The report recommends that Ofsted be made more accountable to Parliament, that Ofsted should issue clearer impartiality guidance, and that this should be enforced as part of the inspections regime. The report recommends that curriculum materials be made available to parents upon request, and that outside providers must accede to their materials being made available to parents before they can be engaged by schools. The report recommends that Ofsted and DFE Guidance, Department for Education, define structural approaches to racism and sexism as political, not moral, as contested rather than consensus values that cannot be taught as a fact without breaching section 406 or 407 duties. Yes, this is very good. Please stop schools from taking moral assumptions from critical race theory and critical social justice theory as gospel. They are not. They are in fact mostly the opposite. They have very little to actually add to people's lives. They need to be treated as what they have been for some time by people with any sort of moral backbone, and that is to leave it to footnotes of history. It should not be taking over entire lives like it is here. It should not even be anywhere near a curriculum, and yet here it is. The report recommends a review of the reporting routes for parents and teachers who wish to pursue complaints of breaches of impartiality. The report recommends a review of how political impartiality duties are taught in teacher training. The report recommends a rebalancing of the curriculum from an equalities harm perspective towards classical liberal ideas of free expression and tolerance for opposition of political beliefs. The report recommends a more nuanced approach to historical episodes where Britain or its leaders have not met contemporary moral standards, such as colonialism, by placing these in world historical context. Yes, 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 and yes. Judging anyone from the past by any sort of modern standard is just absolutely moronic. As I always say, if you're going to judge people who were, say, slavers by modern standards, then there is no reason why you shouldn't be saying things like, well, why weren't these people using computers? Why weren't these people using modern weaponry? Because these things take time to discover. You know, moral ideas are a lot like inventions. They take discovery, and then it takes charismatic people to actually spread those ideas to be popularised. It's the exact same with even physical things. It's just ideas happen to be transcendent, but they still follow the same principles. So this report seems to be very good, and I do hope that the Conservatives are going to take it on board. But this is Clown Decade, and they are going to do the exact opposite. So after all this research, we go back to the article from the IEA, and they've made a handy graph. So after going through quite a lot of the findings that we've just gone through, the IEA have plotted the degrees of wokeness from a scale of 0 to 100 against a left-right orientation, with 0 being Zara Sultana, who is a very far-left Labour MP, or 100 being Nigel Farage, who is about as right as you can get in the Overton window in the political sphere, and it would look roughly like this. So the most extreme 15%, say, of the left wing end up going radically woke. And this is the problem we're in. Most MPs that we have, even Tory ones, by the way, they're probably further left culturally than, say, 30 on the bottom scale there. Some Tory MPs obviously would go further right, but the majority, especially of MPs outside of the Tory party, they are way below that 30% mark, and this is where the problem lies. With half of them basically being complete extremists. In fact, I'd probably say above 30% on the woke scale on the left there is extreme, but just for the sake of this graph, let's say above 50% is the extreme wokery. They are the ones who are pushing the extreme ideology. It is being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. You know, trans women are women, you can't say anything differently. If you're against Remain, you are a rabid racist, things like that. They are the loudest and pushing their morals the most because it gets them the most likes on Twitter. There is very little other reason they do it, by the way. And then these Tory MPs are looking and seeing, oh, that's true, they are getting a lot of likes for this. This must be a popular position. So they throw their hat into the ring for it. They're being sheeped around by this leftist moral monopoly. And hence you end up, say, with the green agenda, with them still going for net zero, even though, yes, I do know that they've opened a coal mine recently. But they are still planning to completely ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, and net zero by 2050 is still one of the highest priorities for the government. And let's not forget that they once again recently banned fracking after Liz Truss tried to do the base thing and allow it to come through. But then as you go further and further right, obviously 100 being Nigel Farage here, Tory MPs, as I say, probably don't go too much further right than 60, if they're the more base ones, say Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, people like that. They are less dragged around by the nose like this, but they actually have quite a lot in common when it comes to these politics, when it comes to the people in their own party who are being led around by that. And this is where the issue comes in. They don't have the moral capital to lead these people around like the leftists do. And that's why, as people have been saying for a while, Cthulhu swims slowly, but he always swims left. And while I think that politics is a lot more complicated than that, certainly at this point that is true. And it is because of this graph, which is just visualising what we all know. The far left have a complete moral monopoly, they are complete extremists, and yet they can set the agenda whenever they want. And MPs who might previously completely disagree, openly they are the complete opposite, because what their job is to get votes every 5 years, and they think that is the way to do it, when really, from the studies we have seen, that is not true. They need to actually go more right-wing. They need to get to wokery to about 20%, and that means being about as right-wing as Nigel Farage, if not slightly less. So that should be the aim, and that is what we need to try and lobby our MPs to do. Now, it's going to be difficult, especially if you are in a Labour constituency, but there's no reason it can't be done. It shouldn't be too hard to persuade these Tory MPs that being anti-woke is the way forward. People do not generally like this. And when it comes to the youth will say absolutely anything that is popular. They are never going to vote for you no matter what, so don't even try. The best thing you can give them is the chance to actually get a job that gives them decent wages and allows them to buy a house. That will see you getting a hell of a lot more Zoomers, and they won't particularly care about all this wokery stuff, because at the end of the day, all they're really doing is repeating things they've seen on social media or from teachers. Well, if you give them the opportunity to get a house, they'll probably forgive you for all your faux pas. But, well, that's not happening. Well, expect to be in a woke-topia in 20 years or so. And at that point, they still won't be allowing developers to build new houses because it's bad for the environment or something, making the problem of the housing crisis even worse. Anyway, I don't want to go on a whole nother rant over that side of the political landscape, so I'm going to leave it there. Once again, I would like to thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.